Children,
Yes, Mama!
will you like me to tell you a story?
Yes, Mama, please tell us.
The last words of the dying were the only words Mama Eyó ever wrote down. Not recipes, not letters, not prayers or poems or the names of people she loved. Just last words. The final things people said before they left this world and went wherever it is that people go. She had been collecting them for 60 years. The book was old now, thick and heavy and soft at the edges from being handled so many times. The cover was dark brown leather, worn smooth like the back of a very old hand. The pages inside were filled from top to bottom in her small, careful handwriting, names and dates and the exact words, copied down as quickly as she could so she would not forget even one syllable. There were 437 entries. 437 people whose last breath she had been near enough to hear. Some had known she was listening, some had not. Some had spoken to her directly, gripping her hand, looking into her face, saying the thing they most needed to say. Some had spoken to people who were no longer in the room, or to God, or to nobody at all, or to someone only they could see standing at the foot of the bed. Every single one was different. Every single one was true. And Mama Eyó, who was now 81 years old and walked with a stick carved from good mahogany and whose white hair was wrapped in a deep orange cloth, carried that book with her everywhere she went. Because you never knew, she said, when someone was going to need to leave, and she did not want to miss it. People in her village called her strange. People in neighboring villages called her a little frightening. Travelers who passed through and heard her story called her the most interesting person they had ever met. She called herself a listener. The dying have things to say, she always said. The living are usually too busy crying to hear them. Someone has to listen. That is all I do. I listen. But the story I'm about to tell you is not about the words she collected. It is about the words she almost could not find for herself. She had not meant to start a collection. She was 21 years old when it began, young and newly married, living in a small house at the edge of Ibade village with her husband Taiwo, who was a carpenter and smelled of good wood and always had sawdust in his eyebrows. Her grandmother was dying. Nana, that was what everyone called her, had been sick for 3 weeks, and on the last night the family gathered around her bed the way families do, quietly, heavily, with that particular mix of grief and love and helplessness that only comes when someone you have known your whole life is about to become someone you will only remember. Everyone was crying. Eyó was crying too. Her grandmother was the person she loved most in the world, the one who had taught her to cook and to pray and to read and to notice things. Nana's breathing had become slow and shallow, with long pauses between each breath that made everyone hold their own. And then, just before the end, Nana opened her eyes. She looked around the room, at the crying faces of her children and grandchildren, at the candle on the table, at the ceiling, at the window where the night sky showed one bright star. And she said, clearly, calmly, almost cheerfully, "Oh, it is so much simpler than I thought." And then she was gone. Everyone was crying too hard to notice what she had said, but Eyó had heard it. She sat very still in the corner of the room while everyone moved around her, doing the things that need to be done, and she turned those words over and over in her mind, like you turn a beautiful stone in your hand. It is so much simpler than I thought. What had Nana seen in that last moment that seemed so simple? What had she understood? Eyó did not know. She would never know. But the words stayed with her, warm and strange and full of something she couldn't quite touch, but could definitely feel. 2 months later, an old man in the village was dying, and Eyó, almost without thinking about it, went to sit with him. Not as a relative, just as a neighbor, just to be there. His last words were, "I should have danced more. Tell my son I said dance more." She wrote them down that evening in a small notebook because she did not want to forget. The notebook became 2 notebooks, then 10, then the big leather book. 60 years, 437 entries, each one a door she could not go through but could press her ear against, each one a small piece of the answer to the question her grandmother had planted in her at 21. What is it that we understand at the very end that we could not see before? Over the years, Mama Eyó traveled. Not far, not always. She was not a wealthy woman, and the road was not always kind to old legs, but she went where she was called. Word had spread, as word always does in the way of small and interesting things, that there was an old woman who would come and sit with the dying, who would listen, who would not try to fix or comfort or rush, who would simply be there, quiet and present with her book open on her knee, ready to catch whatever came. Family sent for her, sometimes from 3 villages away, sometimes across rivers. Once, memorably, a man hired a car to bring her to a city 2 hours away because her mother was dying and she had heard of Mama Eyó and had asked specifically for her to be there. Mama Eyó never refused, and along the way, she collected. Let me tell you some of the words in that book because they are worth hearing, and because each one is a small story by itself. There was the warrior chief who had fought in 3 wars and led hundreds of men, and whose last words were, "I want my mother," said in a voice as small as a child's, as if at the end all the wars and the weapons and the power dissolved, and what was left was just a boy who missed his mum. Mama Eyó cried when she wrote that one down. She did not usually cry. That one got her. There was the woman who had been estranged from her daughter for 20 years, a fight about something that had started small and grown large, the way things do when people are stubborn, and whose last words were, "Tell her the soup she used to make was the best I ever tasted. Tell her I kept the recipe. Tell her I was wrong." Then she closed her eyes and she was peaceful. The daughter got the message. Mama Eyó made sure of that. There was a young man, only 34, gone too soon from an illness nobody had caught in time, whose last words were, "I am not afraid. I am surprised that I am not afraid, but I am not afraid." He looked almost confused about it, like he was bracing for something that had not arrived. There was a very old woman, 103 years old, sharp as a new blade right to the end, whose last words were simply, "Next," said in a tone of polite impatience, as if death was a slow cue and she had been waiting long enough, thank you. The whole family laughed through their tears at that one. And there was the one Mama Eyó called the most important entry in the whole book. Entry number 212. A young girl, 12 years old, sick from birth, lived 12 short years, and at the end she looked at her mother and said, "Don't be sad. I got to be here. Not everyone gets to be here. I got to be here." Mama Eyó had to stop writing and sit very still for a long time after that one, because the girl was right. She was completely, simply, extraordinarily right. Not everyone gets to be here. And the ones who are here, who are breathing and walking and arguing and laughing and making soup and getting things wrong and going to sleep at night and waking up in the morning, they are the lucky ones. Mama Eyó turned 81 in the dry season. Her granddaughter Timmy made a small celebration, egusi soup and fried plantain and a cake that leaned slightly to the left because Timmy was enthusiastic about baking but imprecise about it, and Mama Eyó ate 2 pieces and said it was the best cake she had ever tasted, which was a lie, but a kind one. That night, lying in her bed, listening to the sounds of the village settling into sleep, Mama Eyó noticed something, a feeling. Not pain, not quite, more like a knowing, a quiet certainty, the kind that does not argue with you or ask for proof, her body telling her something her mind had been trying not to think about. You're getting close. She lay there in the dark and took stock. Her knees had been worse this year than last. The mornings came harder. Things she used to do in one go now needed to be broken into pieces with rest in between. The world had started to look slightly different, sharper in some ways, softer in others, the way things look when you're paying attention, the way you pay attention to something you know you will not have forever. She was not frightened. This surprised her slightly, though it probably shouldn't have. She had sat with 437 dying people. She knew what the end looked like from the outside. She was less afraid of the destination than most, simply from familiarity. But she had a problem. She sat up in bed and reached for the leather book on her bedside table in the dark, and held it in her lap and thought about the question she had been carrying since she was 21. What is it that people understand at the very end that they could not see before? She had 437 answers, but she did not yet have her own, and for the first time in 60 years of collecting other people's last words, Mama Eyó was faced with the most important question of her entire life. What would she say? Not to sound good, not for the book, not for anyone who might be listening, just the true thing, the most true thing, the thing that 60 years of sitting with the dying had actually taught her. What was it? She sat in the dark with her book and she thought, for a long, long time. She thought about it for 3 months. Not anxiously, not desperately, the way she had always done things, slowly, carefully, giving it the time it needed, the way you give bread time to rise. Rushing it would ruin it. She went back through the book, all 437 entries, reading slowly, some of them the 10th or 20th time, looking for the thread, the thing that ran underneath all of them, connecting them the way a river runs underground when you cannot see it. She noticed things she had not noticed before. How many of the last words were apologies, not the dramatic kind, but simple, small ones. I was wrong. I should have said, forgive me. As if the end clarified very quickly and very efficiently exactly what had mattered and what had not. And the things that had mattered most were almost always the moments they had not been fully present for, the moments they had been too proud or too busy or too afraid. She noticed how many of the last words were gratitude, pure, uncomplicated thank yous, for soup, for the way someone laughed, for a particular afternoon 30 years ago that nobody else remembered, for small, specific, unremarkable moments that had somehow, when everything else was stripped away, turned out to be the whole thing. She noticed how many of the last words were about love, not grand love, not the love in songs and stories, just the ordinary daily love. I loved being your mother. I loved watching you sleep. I loved Saturday mornings. I loved the way you always burned the toast and ate it anyway. She noticed how few of the last words were about work or money or status or the things that fill up so many hours of so many lives. Not one person in 437 entries had said, I wish I had worked more. Not one. And then she found entry number 1, her grandmother, the very first. It is so much simpler than I thought. She stared at those words. She had been carrying them for 60 years, turning them over, wondering what her grandmother had seen that seemed so simple. And sitting there in her chair in the afternoon light, 81 years old with her old knees and her white hair and her book, Mama Eyó finally understood what Nana had meant. It was simple. It had always been simple. She had just been looking too hard to see it. Mama Eyó did not die suddenly. She had time, several more months it turned out, months in which she planted a small garden, finished teaching Temi how to make proper egusi soup, argued about several things with several people and was right about most of them, and sat many more times at the bedsides of the dying with her book and her quiet presence. She added 11 more entries in those months. She told Temi, matter-of-factly, that she was getting close. Temi cried. Mama Eyó let her cry for a reasonable amount of time and then said gently, "That's enough now. Make tea." She gave the book to Temi, not when she was dying, weeks before on an ordinary Tuesday with no ceremony. She just handed it over and said, "Keep collecting. Someone has to. It might as well be you." Temi held the book and looked at her grandmother and understood without being told what was being passed to her. Not just a book, a purpose, a way of being in the world. When the last night came, it was quiet. Temi was there, 3 of Mama Eyó's grown children, 2 grandchildren, a neighbor who had been her friend for 40 years and held her hand without saying anything, which was exactly right. Mama Eyó's breathing slowed, and then her eyes opened, clear and calm. She looked around at all of them, really looked the way she had looked at 448 dying people before her, and she smiled. Not a brave smile, not a performed smile, just a real one. Temi had the book open, pen ready, hands trembling slightly. Mama Eyó said, "Oh, Nana was right. It is simple. It was always simple." She paused, breathed. Love people while you have them. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. It's enough. It was always enough. And then she was gone. The room was completely still for a long time. Then Temi looked down at the book in her hands, at the entry she had just written, number 449, and she read it back quietly, in a voice that was barely above a whisper. Love people while you have them. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. It's enough. It was always enough. Nobody spoke, because there was nothing to add. Temi kept collecting. It was harder than she expected and more important than she had imagined, and she understood very quickly why her grandmother had never been able to stop. There is something that happens when you sit with the dying, something that strips away all the noise, all the busyness and worry and small importance we give to things that are not important, and leaves you standing in front of the only questions that have ever actually mattered. Did I love well? Was I present? Did I say the things that needed to be said? Temi began to notice that the people who seemed most at peace at the end were not the ones who had done the most, or achieved the most, or accumulated the most. They were the ones who had paid attention, who had been awake to their own lives, who had loved deliberately and spoken honestly and forgiven quickly and let the small grievances go. The book grew. Temi's daughter took it over after Temi, then her daughter's daughter. The book, by then it was several books, a whole shelf of them, became a kind of heirloom in their family, a living document, a record of what humans say when they have nothing left to protect or perform or prove. And what they say over and over in every language, in every village, in every kind of life is remarkably, beautifully consistent. Love, gratitude, sorry, thank you, I see you, I was here, you mattered. That's it. That's the whole list. After everything, after all the complexity and struggle and noise of a human life, what rises to the surface at the end is staggeringly simple. The same things always, the same small, beautiful things. Nana was right. it is so much simpler than we think. And that is the story of the old woman who collected last words. I want to be still with you for a moment before I say anything else, because this story deserves a moment of stillness. 449 people, 449 final messages, and when you gather them all together, strip away the names and the dates and the specific details, what do you find at the bottom? Love, gratitude, forgiveness, presence. That's it. Not success, not recognition, not the things we spend most of our energy chasing. The things that rise to the surface at the end, the things that turn out to be the whole point, are the things we most often put off. I'll spend more time with them when things slow down. I'll say sorry when the moment is right. I'll tell them I love them. They already know, don't they? They might not know. The moment might not come. Mama Eyó spent 60 years listening to people who had run out of time to say the things they wished they had said sooner. And she distilled all of it, 60 years, 449 voices, into one sentence. Love people while you have them. Not dramatically, not perfectly, just while you have them. Which means today, which means this conversation, this evening, this ordinary Tuesday, which means the person you're going to see later, or call, or text, or sit next to tonight, which means right now. So here's the question I want to leave you with, and I mean this one more than almost any question I have ever asked. Is there someone in your life you have been meaning to say something to? Something kind, something honest, something that is true and important and that you have been saving for later? Don't save it. Say it. Today, if you can, this week at the latest, before the noise and the busyness and the completely ordinary Tuesday swallows it whole. Because the last words you will regret most are the ones you never got to say. And the ones that will stay with someone longest, that they will carry with them like a warm stone in a pocket for the rest of their life, are the ones you said when you didn't have to, when there was no urgency, no crisis, no dramatic moment forcing your hand. Just love offered freely on an ordinary day to a person who needed it. That is Mama Eyó's gift to us. That is the whole book. Share this story with someone you love, right now, while you have them. Leave a comment telling me who are you going to say something to today. Subscribe for more stories that carry something real. And go. Go make the call. Send the message. Say the thing. I mean it. Go.
I hope you enjoyed the story.
Yes, Mama, we love it.
See you next time. Bye.